My name is Prakhar Gupta and I build more confident Indian minds.
Before we begin talking about how to stand up for yourself, before we begin addressing this question, I want you to do me a favor and sit down for a second and a half, pause the video if you must, and think of the last time you felt like you needed to stand up for yourself and remember the helplessness that you felt in doing so. It's going to be very important. We are going to address the XYZ ABC of it. Stay with it for a second. And once you're done, remember, if you've had this problem in the past, if you watch this video, you will probably never encounter this again. You will understand the entire matrix that goes behind something like this. I've been gifted in this way. I'll tell you stories in just a second, but I've been lucky enough where I learned this trait quite early on. And I'll tell you what one must go through in standing up for themselves. We are doing a workshop on this. It's called The Art of Conversation, Riz Edition. It's on the 1st of July. If you sign up now, you get a discounted price as always. If you're part of the inner circle, if you've bought AOC, if you're on the email list, if you are a member, you get a discounted price. Go to the link in the description. Ansh has done a brilliant job of copying and pasting a link in the description. Ansh is brilliant like that. Click on the link and sign up if you want. That's it. Continue watching the video and continue making your notes. Okay, story 1. This is high school, bro. High school's a complicated time. I fell into the company of 5 dudes. We were a group of 6 guys. And guys, when they're guys by themselves, when they're not interacting with women, particularly at that age, what happens is you become very brutal. Right? All our interactions were based on, जैसे कहते हैं ना, लेना, where you're dissing each other constantly, continuously, very friendly. It's not bad, but constantly it was about something about the other person and how it was a shortcoming. Needless, constant, brutal insistence on lena. That's what you used to call it. I don't know what the word is. And I remember many years after, about 2 or 3 years after, I was sitting down with one of them, जो मेरे high school friends थे. They had at this point elevated, gone to colleges in different cities. We'd stopped being friends so closely. I was sitting down with one of them after something had just happened and I was mentioning to them and said, bro, I didn't realize it back then, but all the things we were joking about, all the things that we were saying to each other, we thought it was in good fun and so on and so forth, right? It created a sort of an impact on me. I grew up kind of plump, fat, right? And all the jokes about me being fat kind of created shame in me. Then there was this entire episode of my first girlfriend was in high school, 10th, 11th grade, right? And I was a very shy person around women. Like my friends knew about the time I fainted in front of her, but not just that. I remember the first time I met her, I couldn't speak words and my friends knew that. And they would constantly joke about it. And I remember the time I broke up with her, in high school, it's all dumb, stupid shit. But part of it was because I could not take the constant lena around it. I could not. And this is probably the first time I'm ever admitting it. But I mentioned to my friend, I said, bro, all those days I hoped I said something. Because it created years worth of unconditioning for me. I was ashamed of the fact that I was fat. I was ashamed of the fact that I was not as good at playing football. I was ashamed of the fact that I could not speak to women the way you could. And my friend looked at me and he turns around and he says, bro, you should have just said it. We didn't mean it. I said, I know you did not mean it. It's very natural for you to do what you did. But I wish I had said something. That day I realized that all the times you don't stand up for yourself, you let some part of your soul get calloused. You let some part of yourself be impeded upon. You let some part of your soul dies every time you do not represent yourself properly. I learned that if I were to stay silent to things that I was not okay with, if I did not stand up for myself and my preferences and the way I wanted things to be with me, it'll have an impact on me. Whether that be fear, whether that be shame, whether that be the evidence that I'm weak, all of those things combined, it's going to have a cost on me. I will stop being me as much as I could be if I let things slide. And you've been there. You can feel the suffocation too. Story 2 is a few years later from this. And this is with my father. My father's a typical Indian dad. And you know how terrifying Indian dads can be. My father is also a very poor man at birth and a fairly well-to-do man now. My father made his riches. My father made his status. My father made his reputation. He's the kind of guy who worked hard all his life to provide for his kids. He's the kind of guy who worked in absence of any support largely from the outside world. And a man like that is very hardened. He had his principles, he had his rules, and we were to follow those rules. Even many years after my issues with my father are done and dusted with, sometimes he'll walk home and he'll announce himself. He usually says my sister's name and now more recently my dog's name. So he'll walk in and be like, Tillu, just to let everybody know he's home. There is a fear response that goes straight to my head. Like it's just like a sinking feeling in my heart. My father's home, we need to clean up our acts. We cannot be doing what we want. And back in the day when I was in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, afterwards, it was, you could not be watching TV, particularly movies. If you were found watching movies, my God, is my dad going to burn the world? I remember 10th ke boards, right after I'd finished my board exams for 10th grade, my friends were all going to watch Robo from that South Indian actor whose name I'm poorly forgetting. What's his name? The main guy from South Indian movies. Rajnikant's Robo. What am I doing? I'll be castrated for this. Rajnikant's Robo, right? All my friends, the entire batch is going, bro. Everybody, right? And I go to my dad, I'm like, Papa, I finished my boards, I'm going to go watch this movie. He's like, no, अच्छे बच्चे movies नहीं देखते. Dead. On the day you finish your exams, you are not even allowed 2 hours with your friends. I've had moments with my dad where like, just an off sound, just an off movement has resulted in a meltdown. And I grew up being very scared of it. My cousins, my family friends, my siblings, all of them made so much fun of it. They were like, if Chacha enters, if Mama enters, whatever, my Papa was to them, Prakhar is just completely gone. And I think my life's early battle was against the will of my father. Not my father, the will of my father. Because now I understand, The first time I stood up to my father was right after I gave my CA exams entrance CPT. Up until then, I hadn't even thought of what I wanted in life. I'd just finished 12th grade. My dad said, listen, you'll do CA because I want you to. I was like, okay, this should be whatever. 12th grade, I wasn't serious. I didn't know what to make of what. Sat in my exam. Gave my exam. As soon as I was done, I came home. I told my dad, I said, listen, I don't want to do this. My dad looks at me dead in the eye, says, Bado ne keh diya na? And that's it. He didn't even finish his sentence. That look was enough. I walked back in my room, cried that night, maybe told my mom about it. Horrible. I waited 1 more year to confront my dad. The next time I gave my IPCC exams, which are the intermediate exams in your CA curriculum, I went to my dad, said, listen, Papa, there is no way in hell I'm happy doing this. My dad looked me in the eye, he said, yaad hai last time kya hua tha? He said, yaad hai? Bado ne keh diya na? And at this point, I'd grown up a little bit enough. And I'd had this conversation with my friends parallelly where I'd realized that if you stood up for yourself, things happen. So I said, Papa, no, this is not okay. I went to Tauji straight, my dad's older brother. My Tauji sat me down. He sat my dad down. He said to my dad, he said, this is not the way to explain to kids. And he sat me down and he explained why I must continue doing CA. I lost that battle. I was shit scared sitting in that room with my Tauji, my mummy, my Taiji and my Papa. They were all sitting there. I was sitting there. My brother was there. And I remember I could not meet my dad's eyes. He's a terrifying man. And I did not know what to do. And so whatever my Tauji said, I said, okay, yes, fine, I'll do it. Came home that day. The final, or at least the final battle began with me refusing to do CA with my finals. CA finals, I got accepted at Columbia around the same time. I didn't crack my CA finals. I said, listen, I'm going to go. That day I was angry. I was really mad for failing. You know the emotion. You felt it. I was like, shit, my dad knew not to intervene that day. But that sort of gave me the confidence that if I was at least performatively passionate, if I was at least visibly angry, there is a scope. He does listen. He does understand. Right? He did not intervene. But it wasn't easy. Once I moved to America too, me and my dad would have conflicts all the time. My mom was the middle woman. She had to suffer through hours of me crying and my dad being angry. The last fight I remember having with my father, I was breaking down and crying, completely exhausted from crying for over an hour where my father would just refuse to listen to me. And listen, this was the theme of this conversation, okay? I was telling my dad was giving me some feedback. And my dad has this habit of giving general feedback in specific situations. Like, don't be arrogant or don't do X. But have I done X? No, I'm just saying, well, if you're saying it's impacting, it's hitting my self-worth, Don't say it, right? And I remember having this brutal conversation where I'm crying. I'm like, can you not see? You're making me cry so bad. Can you not stop doing this? And my dad's like, I don't want to bother with this. For an hour, he's like, I don't want to bother with this. I was like, no, you are going nowhere. You will listen to me today. This has been waiting for 23 years inside me. You will listen to me today. And it was a very difficult conversation. And I remember for an hour just crying in front of my roommate here in America. Just crying, bro. Bawling. After I was done, I looked at him. I said, sorry, bro, I'm crying. He's like, nah, bro, I understand. And in that moment, I knew it's not just me. Everybody has this. Right? The point probably never got through in that moment. But here's what I learned from doing that. At this point, I should mention, I have a beautiful relationship with him. He's my best friend. If there is one man I look up to every day I wake up, it's him. I have a photo of him right in front of my bed, and I wake up and I touch the feet of that photo. And I'm not a religious man. It's come to that point. I must tell you that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But here is what I learned. One, I learned that it is because I could stand up to my friends in a certain capacity. It was easier to stand up against my dad. Stand up for myself in the conditions with my dad. Two, I understood with standing up for yourself, especially if there's a history of you not standing up for yourself, especially if you're raised by a father like mine or a mother like mine, if you're raised under circumstances where things are imposed upon you and you've silently allowed that to be the case. And I learned, especially when it's family, when you get into conflicts, they're usually emotional. You are releasing a bunch of just pent up emotion. That's what you feel when you're standing up to your father and your knees start shaking. It's all that emotion. It's almost that layer of what people now fondly call trauma. Them breaking and that emotional release that comes from there. The third thing I learned was conflicts, if done properly, lead to a better life. They're like barriers. Right around the edge, they get very tough. Once you go through it, beyond that, life gets so much better. I'm glad for every fight I've had with my father. Because I know when he looks at me, he finds love, and when I look at him, I find respect. I know that. I'm so glad we went over all of that. That's what he will tell you. That's what my mother will tell you. And finally, here is story 3. Story 3, incidentally, you were all a part of. That happened online, not too long ago. You remember. You remember my conversation with Sandeep Maheshwari. And say what you will about it. But all of us saw a very respectable person in the Indian YouTube industry misbehaving and getting handled properly by me. I don't want to talk too much about it. The situations in court, we don't want to add things here. I don't want to take shots at him again. But we all saw that. And in fact, if my DMs are anything to go by, you respected that. Here is what I learned from that. I learned that if I could stand up to my father, there is no man coming before me and trying to oppress me in any way whatsoever. If I could stand up to my father, there is no stronger enemy that will disarm me this way. There is nobody that will stand in my way. 2, when you are in a conflict, when you're about to stand up for yourself, this is a very important lesson I learned during this time. You generally are tempted by several motivations. There's several kinds of motivations that you have when you're trying to fight back. And for the sake of simplicity, let me classify them as only 2 motivations. The first motivation is to hurt the other person. You will feel this in you. Whenever you're angry, whenever you're standing up for something, whenever you're standing up for yourself against somebody, you will feel this motivation in you. You'd want to hurt them. And hurting them, psychospiritually speaking, is a form of getting them to listen. That's what your sort of mind is trying to do, your instinct's trying to do. But you must resist that and focus on only telling the truth. In a conflict, I learned the best way to go forward is to only say things that make your soul lighter. Because if you remember from story 1, the lesson I learned by standing up to my friends was that every time you don't stand up for yourself, you let a part of your soul die. So every time you stood up for yourself, Prakhar said to Prakhar during that time, you must only say things that make your soul lighter. The only reason to get into conflict is to refuse to live in a world where you can be bullied. These are 3 very prominent stories of me standing up for myself when I was called to. And those were the bunch of lessons I learned. But let's sit for a second and go over each lesson and spend time talking about it. Lesson 1. You better start standing up for yourself or you will never meet yourself. When we look at the life of an individual, when you look at your own life, when you think about your life, you think of your life as large moments of peace and pleasure disturbed by some moments of conflict and disturbances. But when you think about the life of a society, the life of a nation, the life of a cause, you think about a large series of conflicts punctuated by moments of peace. And I urge you to reframe your life and think about it like this. Much like we had to go through many movements before independence arrived to India, much like America had to go through many movements before American independence happened, much like the French had to do it. Much like all causes require you to fight for a long enough time, the cause of meeting yourself, the cause of actualizing into your being requires the same amount of conflicts. Do not avoid them. Lesson 2. Initially, it will be tough. But all tough things are meaningful. Meaning, one of the necessary conditions to create meaning in what you do. And a lot of people feel nihilistic. They don't know what they're for, what they're doing, why they're here, so on and so forth. And those people, one of the most proximate advices you can give them is do something that's tough and painful. It is the pain you incur in the process of acquiring something that lends itself meaning. There is a reason why your Rolex is extremely meaningful to you. Because you spent years working to make that money and save it. Initially, it will be tough. But tough things tend to be meaningful. Lesson 3. You will have a lot of emotions. It's unavoidable. It's a stack of all the times you agreed to let things slide when things were not okay. All the times your soul was folded in and reduced. All the times your spirit was damaged and distorted. Unleashing at the same time. You'll feel so much. It'll not be easy. Here is what I do propose on that front though. Before you get into a conflict, sit with it as long as you can. It helps you digest all the residual emotion, all the hurt, all the anger. Most of the stuff that's superfluous, most of the stuff that's inside your head, that gets processed and digested. However, when you do confront, when you do face conflict, when you do stand up for yourself, some emotion will come out. Let them out. It's okay. You can't stop that. That might cause some hurt in the other person. That is okay. That is theirs to clean. It might cause some guilt in you. Later on, you might feel like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. That's for you to examine. Maybe there was a better way of saying it. Maybe you're too empathetic. Maybe you don't take enough space. That's a signal. That's a cue for your mind to interpret. The general point is you will face a lot of emotions. And that's pretty normal. And you must go through those emotions. Because once you're past those emotions, you get access to what I like to think of as the control room of confrontation. Like you get very easy with it. Okay, I have to confront. I know this is how it's going to go. I know what to do from here. Lesson 4. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. What you do when you enter into a conflict, when you take on the challenge, when you confront something or somebody, when you stand up for yourself, is you symbolically shake up your reality. Think about that friend of yours in the football field who bullies you. When you stand up to him, for everybody in the football field is a shake of reality. Symbolically, you've just said, the guy on the top, you don't belong there. And I need to move up. That I need to be respected and liked. It's not easy. The other person might get angry. They might throw themselves down. They might do everything in their power to hurt you. It's not easy. When you stand up to your father, for that matter, anybody in your family, it's not going to be easy. They're going to get mad. And then the best shot they have at maintaining reality is to completely shake it up. In any which case, the odds that things might get bad are real, but the odds that things get better after they get bad are more real. Lesson number 5. Every time you do it, it gets better. To a great degree, you're conditioned as a whole to be non-confrontational. Now, I can get into the sociology of it, but India is largely a society of convenience. This is a consequence of the history of poverty and so on. You can get into that sufficiently. We don't need to. But largely, you are programmed for a variety of reasons to not stand up for yourself. Believe it. You can see it. If you don't see it, believe it. If you believe it, don't see it, whatever. It's pretty evident. Everybody knows that. Be that your schools, be that your colleges, be that your workplaces, be that your families, be that your friends. There is a constant insistence that you play the role. that you separate yourself from power, that you don't shake up things too much. And so I understand you don't feel prepared yet to do it. But trust me, the more you do it, the better you get at it. The sharper you get at it. The less hurtful you get at it. The more spiritual you get about it. Lesson 6. Speak only that which unburdens you. This is an important one. And it's fairly difficult to keep following. But remember, whenever you are in a conflict, whenever you're angry and going through those emotions, there will be a temptation to say the kind of things that hurt the other person. To be mean, to reassert yourself, to be sharp and hurtful. I know enough people who have this ability built into their tongues where they can slice through your throat by just saying things. They have acquired their speech as a weapon. What they do not understand, and what you may not understand in the heat of anger, is that every time you do something like this, one, it probably will not solve your problem. Probably you standing up for yourself will no longer be about you and your boundaries. It will become about how you hurt them. 2, you will carry the guilt of it. And so even if you feel like maybe I reasserted my boundary here, you added more burden on yourself. Now you have to deal with the fact that you hurt them in this specific way. And it's not like you will never forgive yourself for it. You will forgive yourself for it. It will eventually go away, but it prolongs the problem for no good reason. And more importantly, it still does what the conflict did to you, which is it eats at your soul. Now, I can explain that, or you can just slightly go deeper into your experience and remember it. Lesson 7. The purpose is not to fight whenever or whatever. The purpose is to have the ability to fight when your door is knocked. This is very important. This is not the straw man of what I'm saying here, which is take on conflicts when they come to your, doorstep. Is okay, so you want us to fight all the time. And this is a confusion that people might get into, because when you've spent so long being oppressed, being on the side where you did not stand up for yourself, once you start to do that and you start liking it and you start seeing that reality bends to the way you assert yourself, you might get kind of hooked to that. You might think this is the way to go about it. These are the people who have confused power for the ultimate truth of life. People who think power is everything, because they've seen when they have power, things go their way. And they think this is the only pleasure worth seeking. This is the ultimate. You might think this is uncommon. This is super common. The purpose is not to take on as many fights as you can. The purpose is to take on the fights that you think are worth your time, that prevent your soul from being damaged by the will of another. But you must have the ability. You must have the ability to digest the emotion, which you have to do in all previous conflicts. You must have the ability to stand tough on your ground when things get tough. You must have the ability to face the pressure. All of those things. You must cultivate the ability. Not take your sword and slice through whoever you can. Well, having said that, I get it. I get the philosophical lessons, Prakhar. I understand the corpus of this idea. I understand what conflicts are, and I understand what is my experience going to be going through a conflict like this, and I understand that there is something I can do about it, and it might be tough. But what can I do immediately? What is your practical advice on this? By the way, I write about this very extensively in my book, Don't Shut Up, because I think there's a whole chapter about how do you fight with your father, pretty much stemming from my own experience. And so some of it might be repeat if you've read the book, but if you haven't, hear me. Number 1, establish your worldview. You are in a haze of emotion. You are excessively emotionally burdened. There is a lot of stuff. Every time you've been walked all over, pushed around, it's not just that time. You're reminded of all the other times that has happened to. You're in a haze of emotion. When you want to stand up for yourself, sit down by yourself and establish how you think it should be. Saying you are wrong is half the problem solved. Saying how you are wrong and how things might be right, that's what you're aiming for. Establish your worldview. Logically figure out how things should be. Point 2, write it out. Writing it makes it more real. 1, you will discover in the course of writing that there is all these sub points you also had about this, all these other sharper ways of thinking about it that you also had that you want to mention. And 2, what will also happen as you write is that you will process some of the pain associated with this shit. You will see, you will get emotional. I've had people get emotional. I've myself gotten emotional writing this stuff out. You will cry a little bit. Good. You're digesting all the emotion you would have faced in confrontation. Step 3, write out all possible pushbacks and their responses. When you'll say this to the other person, say you say this to your bully in the playground, say you say this to your father or your mother or your sibling, say you say this to somebody at the workplace, your peer or whatever, say this, you say to somebody outside, this other person who's your neighbor, who's creating a whatever wall that you don't like, right? Whatever, it could be whatever. They'll have pushbacks, bro. They're not dumb. They're used to dominating. They know how to work their way around this shit. They'll come with answers. They will be prepared. You need to write out what those pushbacks might be and what your responses to it might be. You will see that the clarity you acquire over the situation is tremendous. Now, intellectually, which is where you win these battles, you are in the driving seat. Trust me. Then, sit for a while on this. Wait the conflict out a week. From the day of incidents, from the day of writing this stuff out, sit on it for a week. Let all residual emotions get processed. Sit through the pain. You are not the world's best human being. Some of the stuff you could change too. And I'm not even saying some of the stuff in the sense of how bad you were to them. Some of the stuff in the sense of realizing, listen, maybe it's not the best to get them to agree on this. Maybe I just make my choice and move on. Maybe agree to disagree is the best with these things. A conflict is an invitation for you to begin changing some parts of you too, as much as it is for them to change some parts of them. And you can do your homework before. When you sit on it for that long, a lot of the emotion gets processed. The pain is in your body. You feel it constantly. It's anxiety. Your body is moving. You're like, whoa, I cannot focus. I'm constantly in my head about it. But that's all pain getting processed and slowly removed. All the emotion slowly being digested. All the understanding slowly settling on itself. That's just how your mind works. Your mind in its overthinking loop is trying to solve the puzzle in the back of your head. Let that happen. Digest the emotion. Then, step 5, say it out. Cause the mess. Try to say it with conviction, with fierceness, with assertion, and with as much detachment as possible. But say it out. Cause the mess. Break the pieces. It's important. They had to be broken. These things were not real anyway. These things were only imaginary because I let them be real by not acting. These things are not real. They have to be broken. Something more real has to be found. The frame you must carry when you go say and cause this mess, as I put it, the frame you must carry when you go say all of this, cause the mess, as I say, is here is my version of the truth. We will either play by these rules or we will probably not play. Probably because it depends on what your circumstances. See, you see that the frame requires you to be so detached that it's not like you have to listen to me. Sometimes it will be that because you cannot help yourself. You're in the early stages of getting over this stuff. But largely your attempt is to get to this frame. That's why you sit over it. That's why you write it out. That's why you process as much emotion as you can. Step 6, clean the mess. Now that you've caused the mess, now that you've said your piece, they're going to think about it. They're going to respond. It's going to do its magic on them. All of that's going to happen. Now clean the mess. Because every time you get into a confrontation, you don't walk out non-bloody. You walk out with blood on your hands too. You walk out with guilt and you walk out with vulnerability. Either you said too much and it hurt them and you have the guilt for it, you know you will. Or 2, you will have the vulnerability of crying in front of them, of appearing weak, of standing up for yourself, of dealing with this trauma, all of this shit. Let that be the case. Deal with it. It's okay, I cried. I had to get it off my chest. It has been sitting on my chest for this long. That's why I cried so much. And what you begin to understand in this process is that to some degree, having my own world is better than involving all these other people in my world who can change my world. This is probably the lesson that people learn as they get older. Step 7, take on the changes as an adventure that your life deserves. See, this is what I meant by reframing how you understand conflict. Instead of thinking as conflict being some kind of distraction, some like thing I have to do even though I don't want to because I want my life to be this way. This is the path. This is the path. This is where you had to get. And now that you've had this conflict, certain things need to change. Either it could be that your fathers refuse to sort of give you money as you're growing up, so you need to live separately. It could be that your friend circle needs to change. It could be that your strategy to doing XYZ, ABC in your workplace needs to change. Whatever that change is, take it on as an adventure because that is the exact adventure your life deserves right now. You could have gone on living with your soul slowly dying, with it inching away, slowly being brushed off. But no, you decided to take control of your life, of your reality, of yourself. You decided to meet yourself. You decided to discover who you are in standing up for yourself. And now that requires a certain amount of changes. So be it. That's the adventure my life deserves. And step number 8, always remember the end goal. Usually the goal is not to fight, but to reestablish boundaries. That this is not how things will be. Don't get lost in the temptation of fighting. Don't get lost in the pleasure of hurting someone else. It might be required to some degree. Not fighting that. We are being realistic. There is no moral, idealistic, perfectly spiritual way in which you do conflicts. But don't get lost in it. Remember, once the boundary is set, you can walk on. And if you need motivation, real motivation, true motivation, really figuring out why you must do it still, why you must stand up for yourself. Forget being rude or not being rude. Why you must stand up for yourself. The answer is very simple, man. Because people you care about and people who care about you are always watching. They're observing. They know. They see strength or they see weakness. They see it. And forget other people. You are always watching. 23-year-old Prakhar remembers the night he cried talking to his father. And that is why 27-year-old Prakhar is unbeatable. 19-year-old Prakhar remembers him telling his friend about all the traumas he accumulated from hanging out in that circle. That is why 23-year-old Prakhar could cry in front of his father. You are always watching. And make sure you end up becoming somebody you're proud of. Forget everybody else. Make sure when 24-year-old Jaskaran looks at 50-year-old Jaskaran, he's like, hell yeah. Make sure you do that. Well, having said that, first of all. Secondly, all 3 of the points I raised, my friends, my family, and Sandeep, all these stories, none of them is to say any of them are bad people. And I'm not saying my father is a terrible man. I'm saying my father is a terrifying man. I'm not saying my friends were bullying me. I'm saying I was letting what my friends were doing pass. In fact, I was complicit. I was doing the same to my other friends too. It was the same. It was a two-way street. I'm not even saying that somebody has to be definitively evil for you to stand up for yourself. I'm just saying circumstances are complicated and life must be lived simply. See you on the other side.